Are you ready, kids?
Aye, Captain!
If someone had have told me that one of the most fun games I was going to play in 2020 was a remake of an old SpongeBob Squarepants game, well, I'd probably ask what they've been smoking. And yet, here we are, and that might actually be the case.
I wanna play!
With the remake of the cult classic SpongeBob Squarepants The Battle for Bikini Bottom, developed by Purple Lamp Studios. Now, this is a really solid remake of an old platforming game from a simpler time, a game which some reviewers seem to be having trouble enjoying for some reason. Probably because it doesn't have people being beaten to death with golf clubs.
Help! They're making me hit myself!
Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated is a charming, colourful platformer with light combat elements and the odd boss fight here and there, with the intended demographic being younger kids, but I think most people playing this thing are probably people like me, young adults to adults who played this thing back in the day and are just looking for that sweet, sweet nostalgia hit. Well, look no further because I found it.
Oh, and the robot is down!
I know, you're probably amazed that the same guy who brought you reviews for Doom Eternal and Manhunt can find enjoyment in a game like this, right?
You just met the Sponginator.
Now, it is pretty dumb to take this thing too seriously. In fact, you probably shouldn't. I mean, it's SpongeBob Squarepants, it's not Ayn Rand. The story is ludicrous and wastes no time in getting going. Evil genius Plankton has created a machine to build robots he hopes is going to help him steal the Krabby Patty formula from Mr. Krabs. But instead, the robots become self-aware faster than you can say Skynet, and they turn on him, then taking over Bikini Bottom and leaving SpongeBob and his pals to save the day.
Oh, how shellfish of you!
Playing as the eponymous hero, you'll explore areas like downtown Bikini Bottom to the Jellyfish Fields and even more interesting locations like Rock Bottom and the Kelp Caves, completing quests for characters like Mrs. Puff, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, among a heap of others. These characters from those earliest seasons of SpongeBob is a lot like the earliest seasons of The Simpsons, and I think people are really going to like interacting with them again, seeing the only time that I've seen these characters pop up over the years has been in meme format. The goal of each area is generally the same. You'll talk to a character from the show who often has some sort of task for you to finish. No matter what the task is, the reward is always the same, and it's a golden spatula, and this thing's one important resource. Because once enough of these things are required, you can then unlock a new and more challenging area. Aside from finding these in the levels, you'll also get them from returning Patrick's socks. You see, he's misplaced a few dozen of these things.
Boy, Patrick will be glad to have this back.
And also turning in shiny things to Mr. Krabs, who'll give you a spatula in return for a few thousand of them. And of course, the more you buy from him, the higher the price goes. It's classic supply and demand. This guy's just got the capitalism game completely sorted. I mean, damn.
Yes, well, it's a good one though, eh?
Shiny things is kinda like currency, and they either drop from defeated enemies or are placed around the levels in total abundance, in hard to reach places or inside the countless tiki heads you come across, all of which react differently. There's just so much stuff to find in these levels, and it's almost got a bit of a light Metroidvania vibe, forcing you to go back to older levels with new abilities to get to those out of the reach areas. The game's saving your progress every 2 seconds as well, so you don't have to worry about losing all that much progress in case you have to, suddenly stop playing. There's even teleporting cardboard boxes to help you backtrack through the levels to find whatever you missed. And it's a simple gameplay loop, but that's really part of its appeal. Part I think of what makes this game so enjoyable though is just the writing and the presentation. There's frequent cinematics throughout the game with characters from the TV show making an appearance like Squidward, and I love too how Gary somehow always ends up in the places where he's not really supposed to be. The voice acting and the dialogue is entertaining and it's genuinely funny at times. I mean look, I'm a 34-year-old guy sitting there watching the whole thing with this goofy grin across my face.
Oh, thank you, it all means so much,
It's almost kind of impossible to hate it, and even if you find the whole thing boring or drawn out, you can still skip through the dialogue anyway.
Those fiends, they've thought of everything.
This is also a pretty damn good looking game too, and it probably helps that it runs super smoothly. Runs on the Unreal 4 engine, no surprise, and it's one of the few times where that engine doesn't seem to struggle or have any major issues. Character models look great, they're animated really well, and there's a decent amount of variety between all of the levels. The open, sandy beaches of the Goo Lagoon are in pretty stark contrast to somewhere like the Kelp Caves, where stark beams of light shine through the cracks in these dimly lit passageways, and I really love the skyboxes as well, like it looks like it's straight out of an episode on TV.
I don't speak Italian.
You can tell the developers are fully embracing the show's meme status too, like the idle animation if you stand around too long with SpongeBob. And I don't even know what they're trying to do with Patrick's face here, but I've got an idea. But they can miss me with that dry SpongeBob face. I mean, look at it. That's the stuff Nightmare's made of. Most surprisingly too is that Bikini Bottom's gameplay is smooth and polished. Movement controls feel precise and responsive, and platforming's really easy thanks to being able to move the camera wherever you need it to go with the mouse or the right thumbstick. In the game, you're able to play as 3 characters, the first one obviously being SpongeBob, as well as his best bro Patrick, and then their gal pal Sandy. And you can swap them out at any time during a level instantly at a bus stop. And they've each got their own different ability to bring to the table. So SpongeBob can use his bubble wand to take out enemies and can also jet up in the air to reach floating tiki heads. Later on in the game, you get the ability to bubble bowl, basically fabricating a bowling ball out of thin air to use as a weapon or to solve puzzles. Like that infamous puzzle that a certain reviewer got stuck on.
That means you fall off of the button, which closes the gate and prevents you from bowling the bubble where you intended, when you intended.
Yeah, that was hard. He can bungee jump on fishing hooks and eventually shoot out a torpedo bubble, which I don't even know how that's supposed to work. And he's also able to sneak around by gently pressing down on the left thumbstick, which you're going to use later on in the game to get past these deadly sleeping robots that are able to shoot out laser beams from their frickin' heads. Patrick's initial difference is that he's a bigger target than SpongeBob, but look, that's only because there's more of this guy to love. Aside from using his portly figure to dispatch the robots, like SpongeBob, he can also double jump and slam into the ground. His defining feature though, aside from his boyish good looks, is that he's able to pick up objects and throw them, hitting enemies or just buttons to solve puzzles. Pick up a watermelon or a stone tiki head, or throw an ice cube into the slime and freeze it. Lastly, you've got Sandy, and she's the one that makes all the platforming a little bit easier. Sandy can lasso enemies for an easy ranged kill, but it also serves as a bit of a ghetto grappling hook. And then when jumping can be turned into a makeshift rotor, slowing down your descent, which is kinda handy for some of the trickier jumps, but also just for collecting those elusive spatulas. And of course, Patrick's socks. I mean, come on son, what's going on with this guy's socks?
Ooh, do I really have to carry Patrick's socks?
All 3 of these characters come together and it makes for some really enjoyable and seamless gameplay. I mean, you're not going to be dodge rolling to avoid enemy attacks, abusing iframes or any of that kind of nonsense. It's accessible and the kind of thing you can pick up and play within minutes. All of the robots have different attack patterns and some of them can throw you off the first time you encounter them, but these attacks are highly telegraphed and easy to counter. It just feels great to play, jumping around on platforms and smashing enemies with a bubble wand, karate kicking or using Patrick's lovable stomach. There's just not much else to say about it.
I will crush them! Ooh. Hey, my back feels better.
You don't need rubber banding execution animations or button mashing prompts. This is combat and platforming from a simpler time. You get a real sense of impact when killing enemies as they explode and send shiny things out in all directions. And there's a decent amount of it level to level, always introducing some new kind of robot for you to smash to bits. There's also the odd boss fight here and there, and the scale of some of these is actually kind of impressive. First fight, you're up against the Jellyfish King while he's in the middle of taking a shower, which is kind of creepy. He's then got 3 or so different attacks, which you can avoid pretty easily as long as you're conscious. After that, you're in the Poseidome fighting a giant robot version of Sandy. Poseidon puns, I love it. This thing slams into the ground and you've got to attack its helmet while it's dazed.
Nice move by SpongeBob. This match is just about over.
Later on, it's an evil robot version of Patrick and you've got to kick it in the butt, literally. Tapping out with Sandy as it switches between phases. I mean, it's like Dark Souls for kids.
You're right, Sandy.
Now, while you've only got 3 hit points, it's still pretty much impossible to fail in this game. I mean, even when you are killed, which happens after SpongeBob runs out of underpants, no, seriously, the game just then starts up again at the nearest checkpoint and you're free to go right back into it. No lives lost, no points lost, nothing lost apart from your time, which we all know is worthless. Would have been cool to see if the developers had made some kind of super challenging platformer with Souls-like combat set in the SpongeBob universe, but what we've got here instead is a game that is doing its best to appeal to everyone, and you know what, most of the time I think it succeeds. Unless of course you're a gaming journalist. Now look, I didn't want to talk about this, but I guess you kinda have to, and I think the whole response this game has gotten is another pretty good example of this massive disconnect between what gaming journalists and gamers think about releases these days. It's probably not new information at this point, but this thing got reviews as low as 5 out of 10, and even one person gave it a 2 out of 10. I mean, look, at this point, if you're giving a game a 2 out of 10, you're basically saying it's unplayable.
Are you sure this'll work?
And I hope if you've taken nothing else away from this video, you've at least figured out that that's not the case. I don't want to get into a whole song and dance about it, but I will say that I do think it factors into how some gaming journalists, notice I said some, not all of them, just don't really enjoy playing something that has actual gameplay. Seems the kind of games that always get good reviews from critics are the kind of games that are heavy with cinematics or very heavily scripted sequences, so as little thought as possible needs to go into playing them. Often these games have some kind of insultingly easy difficulty mode option to go along with it too. And that's why I think games like The Last of Us 2 are getting such high praise from most critics, despite the gamer response being a lot more polarizing. But then again, that's a whole can of worms that I don't want to open.
Can my day get any more dreary?
I mean, if anything, you'd think this is the kind of game that would be more well received given everything going on in 2020, and just how every single month of the year keeps trying to outdo itself and how terrible it can be. I'd have thought that being able to play as a cartoon sponge, killing evil robots with the bubble wand is the kind of escapism that we'd be hungry for. Sure was the case with Animal Crossing when that came out a few months back. And let me just use this time to say, if you're one of those people who hates Rodney, well, then you're dead to me. Bikini Bottom is a good example of gaming from that bygone era, the early to mid 2000s, when we were flushed with games that took actual skill and concentration to play, and it's recaptured that feeling of early millennium console games perfectly, just with a complete facelift. Some of the puzzles in the game can be pretty confusing and might take a bit of time to figure out, and you might even have to replay certain sections over and over multiple times, but this is a good thing. Now look, I'm not acting like the game is perfect, it definitely has some problems here and there. There's definitely some iffy moments with the hit detection from some of the enemies where you can get hit from something you probably shouldn't have. I also think some of those surfing sections, or whatever you want to call them, where you're sliding down a slope on your tongue, are just kind of unpolished. They could have really refined the placement of some of these jumps and those explosive T-keys. To finish the game, you need to have acquired 75% of the golden spatulas, which means you pretty much have to spend time collecting them along the way. And this can mean that you'll have to spend a bit of time going back and grabbing the ones you missed from those earlier levels, if you still haven't met the quota. Now look, I don't mind the grindy aspect of games if it's something I can go back to and do once I've finished the main story. But if it forms part of the core campaign, well then it's just a pretty weak attempt to pad the game's length out. I'm sure we haven't all forgotten the challenge of the Legionnaires from Anthem. Having said that though, I mean look, this kind of design was common when the game came out, so I don't even really know if you can criticize it for that. It's a remake of a game that did the exact same thing almost 20 years ago, so it's not really a difference of opinion to want it to be different, or to expect it to have magically changed. I mean, it's just an outright wrong stance to take on the game, to suddenly think that it's somehow going to change its colours. It'd be like playing a Tetris remake and complaining that all you're doing is shuffling shapes around and dropping them onto a grid. About the only thing I haven't spent any time in yet is the multiplayer component, only because I haven't got any mates who've bought this thing yet. But I think the single player alone offers up a lot of content and replayability, and it's worth the money alone. I'm not even what you'd call a big fan of the SpongeBob cartoons, but I had an absolute blast playing through this thing the last couple of days. And I'd have no trouble recommending this game to anyone who's after a lighthearted game that won't force the player to watch their own franchise get beaten to death. In an age of constant remakes and remasters, this one's okay in my books.
That robot is down and staying down. What an upset here at the Poseidon.
Are you still here?